This session is focused on HL7 and IHE, and Wayne and I are going to talk about how we're paving a path to better interoperability. And it's going to be an interactive session. We're going to go back and forth, and then we'll allow time for questions at the end. So I'm Joyce Sensmeyer. I'm the Vice President of Informatics at HIMSS, and I work with IHE. HIMSS has sponsored IHE over a number of domains over a number of years, and I'm also the President of IHE USA. And Wayne, you want to say your role?
Yes, and I'm Wayne Kubik. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Health Level 7 International. I've been in that role for 2 years, so this is my third HIMSS meeting. And before I say anything else, I really have to give a vote of approval and just thank you to Joyce and the HIMSS team for doing just an awesome job at this meeting. It just can't imagine how they pull it off, but it just, each year is better than the last, and they do a tremendous job. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you. It's a great honor to be sharing the stage with you. Actually, previous to my job with HL7, I was CTO for another standards organization, CETA. So I have a couple different perspectives on the world of standards, which I'll be referring to during the rest of our chat.
Yeah, and I'm on the CDISC board, so we have a lot in common here. Okay, so the first thing really to talk about is our common vision. HL7 and IHE have been around for quite a while, and Wayne, you want to talk about the HL7 vision?
Yeah. So I think the vision was refined 3 or 4 years ago, and it's actually probably one of the most compelling reasons that made me come to HL7. It's a world in which everyone can securely access and use the right health data when and where they need it. I think it's exactly the right message of what we need at this point in time in the world of healthcare information. And it's an actionable vision. I think particularly in the world of HL7 with the emergence of FHIR, we've talked about achieving interoperability for many, many years, and now we kind of have the technology to actually make it happen. And so it's important for us to be able to work together with all the right parties to really make it a reality.
Okay, thank you. And IHE, which stands for Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise, we're focused on enabling seamless and secure access to health information that's usable whenever and wherever. So that's a pretty pure vision and probably relates with a lot of what you're focused on as well. So how many of you are involved with HL7 standards development or HL7 activities? Oh, good. I was almost going to say it's this side of the room. And how about IHE? How many of you are involved with IHE? Okay, not as many, but a good number.
Well,
Great.
they're all out there, aren't they?
They're in the interoperability showcase. Yeah. Good point.
Just one common thing is the words are different, but the concept is exactly the same.
Yep, exactly. Okay, common mission as well. HL7?
Yes, ours is much shorter, which I also like. I'm a big fan of succinctness, but basically provide the standards that will make interoperability happen.
Yep. And IHE, again, longer, but we use standards and build upon the standards to provide specifications, tools, and services for interoperability. And to do that, we engage clinicians in our committees to really get us started with the use cases. We work with health authorities around the world, certainly the industry and users, to develop, test, and implement standard-based solutions to vital health information needs. So at the core of many IHE profiles are HL7 standards. So that's one way to say we work together. So our processes are very similar as well. IHE has domain and technical and planning committees. We have a conformity assessment process and tools for that a vendor can come through and test that their products are in alignment with our specifications or profiles. We have 3 annual Connect-a-thons around the world, and IHE USA hosts the North American Connect-a-thon. We just held that in January in balmy Cleveland, and we had about 500 systems engineers there testing products from their companies. Coordinated use of standards is a basis of IHE. HL7, DICOM, certainly FHIR is right in alignment there. And we have deployment committees that cover individuals from 17 different countries.
And HL7, again, things are similar. We have work groups that operate under steering committees. We have approximately 50-something work groups divided across 4 steering committees. They meet regularly. They have 3 working group meetings a year, and they meet by teleconference and other ways in between those meetings. We don't do the same degree of rigorous conformance testing that IHE does in their Connectathons. We're trying to move towards that, particularly with the fire standard, but we do have conformance statements as part of our HL7 standards, which are important. That sort of define what it means to conform without necessarily going quite as far to verify that you're actually doing it on individual applications. And again, we're trying to move closer to that. We have Connectathons. They're relatively new to the HL7 world. HL7's been around for 30 years, and the Connectathons were introduced when the fire project began about 6.5 years ago. So we've had not quite 20 of those. They always precede each of our working group meetings in January, May, and September over a 2-day weekend. And we'll talk a little more about that. They're slightly different, but very similar. We develop standards, and our standards, as Joyce said, are often incorporated in IHE profiles along with others, and we do also reference other standards when they're filling some of the gaps that the HL7 standards don't do. So we use DICOM, we involve HL12 when we're dealing with attachments and things. And we have HL7 affiliates in 55 countries. Affiliates is sort of a representative, a country-specific representative of the HL7 organization, and they often deal with localization of the standards, translations, offering training and other type support services. And I guess we both do the same sort of thing, working with the broader health community to try to make these things actually provide practical results to improve healthcare.
Yep. So IHE has a process that it's evolved over about 20 years. And it starts with the use cases, and again, bringing in the clinicians, the users, identifying what are their pain points, developing that into a more of a controlled process, and then looking at what standards are available. So are there HL7 standards or others to apply to that, documenting how to implement those standards in a technical framework, which is available in the public domain, publishing that for public comment, getting feedback, and then publishing it in final versions. We do the testing that we talked about. There is certification that we have in other program called Concert by HIMSS. And then it results in demonstrations here at the Interoperability Showcase, which you can see there's a lot of standards-based interoperability happening, and many organizations involved with that. And IHE USA then focuses on the deployment to ensure that the profiles are implemented worldwide.
And the HL7 process, there are some differences, but again, we're doing the same sort of thing, trying to put together projects to produce specifications that can actually be used to improve healthcare information exchange and interoperability. Our process is ANSI accredited. For almost 30 years we've been an ANSI accredited organization, and that has a lot of restrictions and rules, but are also very positive features. They have to conform to certain rules that are defined by the federal government as voluntary consensus-based standards organizations, and this means we have to have things like openness and a balanced review to make sure that there's no preponderance of interest of one particular group, and that we have to address all concerns before we can actually go through the process of formally publishing and issuing a standard. Now, not all standards are issued as normative accredited standards, and that's sort of like the ultimate gold piece, but we also produce things that are more, we call them standards for trial use, or we have informative standards that are not going through the full accreditation process, but they all follow the same general cycle, that a project proposal statement is issued and is reviewed throughout the working group community and by the technical steering committee, our technical governance board. Specification development happens, particularly in the age of fire over the last 5 years. There's been this trend towards testing as you go along, and so we have this method called standards for trial use, and that's where the fire connectathons are occurring. They're actually testing pieces. It was kind of the key thing about fire. Historically, the standards world was always about defining a standard, developing it, and then putting it out there and see what happens. Well, fire turned that whole model around, being that Let's define something, try it out, refine it, and continue to refine it until we feel it's ready to basically be locked down and rigorous. And that's the process we're going through right now with the current ballot, with the first partial normative release of Fire R4. So we go through that process of developing and testing. We have at a formal point, another one of these ANSI requirements is we make an announcement of everything that's going to go to ballot 30 days before it goes out, so people have a time to decide whether or not they want to participate. They have to decide to participate before we actually release the specification. So you have to opt in. You want to be part of that ballot pool. It goes out to the ballot, which is another 30-day cycle, and then we go through the reconciliation process where we address all comments. We have to get negatives. Normally we try to get them all returned. There's a process if someone is stubborn and digs in their heels, if everyone else says, no, this is unreasonable. But for the most part, it's a consensus-based approach to get the negatives resolved, and that ends up with publication. And if it was a normative standard, then it gets registered with the ANSI organization and becomes publicly accessible as an accredited standard. One of the interesting things, we run our rules under Robert's rules, and so it's very interesting to see that everyone follows the same process, make sure everyone gets a voice, and make sure everything is documented. And the process, I think, is rigorous. It's intensive. It has been historically slow, and again, another advantage of Fire is that kind of move things up quite a bit. To basically, we needed to take ability of agile processes, making things happen, and so it's been evolving. But we've managed to do that while still conforming to ANSI.
Yep. So one way that we've probably confused the industry between HL7 and IHE is that we both have profiles.
Yep.
So we're just going to differentiate what that means in the two organizations. So I mentioned previously that we develop the profiles based on use cases, and those get published in a technical framework. So that is available, and it creates a common language for how to implement standards so that there is consistency, there is conformity, and that way when two vendors have done that in the same way, and they come to test, iterate through the problems, there really is interoperability created. And HL7 has a little bit different approach.
Yeah, and we actually, to make things even more confusing, we have kind of two definitions of profiles, depending on what you're talking about. So in the world of Fire, a profile is a adaptation of a Fire resource for a specific purpose. And so what it does is it imparts constraints, can add extensions, it basically puts rules around how to use a resource for a particular business purpose. And we have implementation guides in the Fire world, which really consist of sets of profiles, usually to solve a use case or a bigger business problem. So you have those things. But then we also have these older profiles, which are called functional profiles, which are lists of functional requirements that were built principally around the EHR world. There was also some for personal health records, and they're describing the types of things that an EHR should be doing in sort of broad functional requirements terms. We've used the term both places. But for the most part, in terms of when we're dealing with IHE, it's the Fire type of profile that fits and matches up very well with the IHE profile. Fire profiles are based on applying the Fire specification, and the IHE profiles tend to be much broader because they'll be bringing in lots of different standards and components that will go beyond what Fire does. So it's kind of a slightly broader, a much broader application of the same thing. And we could see IHE profiles incorporating multiple Fire profiles, for example.
Yeah. So I think one observation that I think I've been able to make as a result of working with Wayne to develop this session is that both of the organizations are evolving and influencing each other. And a lot of that comes from the individuals that are participating in the committees. Some of them are the same people working in HL7, working in IHE. And I think it's improving both of our processes. It's making us all be a little more quick in what we do. The influence of Fire is making us be more agile, or at least try to be. And I think that's a good thing, absolutely. So another thing that we both do, as has been mentioned, is a connect-a-thon. So in general, those are cross-vendor, live, supervised, structured testing events. and the participants' products are tested together in the same place at the same time. So it's really a powerful event if you have an opportunity to be a part of it, to see vendors that are normally competing in the marketplace. And similar to here, they're working together to really move forward interoperability and get their products in line with that. So experts from each of the companies come, and sometimes they are able to resolve on site other problems or issues with the software that they have, rather than doing that, working it out at a customer site. So that's a benefit of the Connect-a-thon. That's kind of a bonus, I guess you would say. And they can test with multiple trading partners, which they may not always be able to do. And typically they're testing real-world clinical scenarios. So the HL7 Connect-a-thon.
So again, in the world of fire, HL7 Connect-a-thons are maybe a little looser than the IHE Connect-a-thons have had. I think historically they've been smaller too. I've only been to a couple IHE Connect-a-thons, but they were pretty big. That's kind of changing. HL7 Connect-a-thons have been getting upward close to 300 people at our last one, and we're expecting them to continue to grow. It does a little bit like what IHE does. It's the same story, getting lots of different implementers together in a room. And they're doing that around particular topics. There are tables associated for each topic. And the topics are dealing with things like, well, there was a value-based care topic, or there's a patient data topic, and there's one in mine that I help do with clinical research. And so, and these exercise the FHIR specification. In some cases, for the more mature FHIR resources, they get very close to what IHE is doing and trying to test them and formally evaluate basically whether they're ready to be moved up the scale of the FHIR maturity model, the FHIR maturity model, which sort of grades the level of stability and completeness of every resource. But in other cases, it's more like your plug-a-thons that you've been doing, where you're out there exploring and saying, what else can we do? And just getting people are all in the same room. Let's experiment and put a flyer and see what we can come up with. And so it's a combination of things that go from trying to make stuff work, trying to test some stuff to see whether it's ready to be promoted in maturity, and trying out new stuff you didn't do before by just getting people together, using the FHIR spec, and you've got the EHR vendors there, and you've got providers there, and you've got application developers there, and so they're all along with the specification developers of the FHIR core team. So it's a really cool thing where a lot of exciting things happen, but again, it's not quite as rigorously structured as the IHE one is, and I see that continuing. I think, again, one of the things we're looking at is trying to get better testing in place for some of the features, but we also want to keep that sort of experimental side as well, because that's really critical to the FHIR culture.
Yep. So the IHE Connect-a-thons are a bit more rigorous. They've been around for 20 years, and we have a real process for technical management. We have testing tools. We have the Gazelle system that enables the whole process to work, so that a vendor that's ready to test can go into the system and say, I'm ready to test this profile, and I'm looking for partners, and then partners are signing into the system as well, and then they link up and do their testing. And then there are monitors that go around the room and make sure that everybody's following protocols and that the process is working. So it's been improved over time, but it doesn't do what HL7 does in that it isn't a hackathon per se. There isn't a changing of code, at least in general, at the time of the testing. So this slide and these next few slides, I'm going to call out John Murky because I see him in the audience. And I stole this from his blog. So a number of the IHE experts are blogging about this work as it's evolving, and how showing how we're working together with FHIR especially. So these, definitely not going to go into these, so I don't want to scare you off, but I just wanted to show you the volume of profiles that we are now working on in IHE that are based on FHIR, and a number of them are ready for implementation. So I mentioned domains. This is a listing of some of them in the IT infrastructure domain, so you can see quite a few of them are available there. John, anything you want to call out on this particular one? Because you're the expert. You're the co-chair, right?
Yeah, thank you, Joyce.
Do we have a microphone maybe to give to John?
Thank you, Joyce. Yeah, I appreciate the call out. I wasn't expecting it.
I
No,
know, I didn't give you the heads up, sorry.
Yeah, so this is the profiles that the IT infrastructure domain has, and actually many of them you can see out on the floor. Mobile access to health documents is kind of the biggest one that we have today. It's an API using FHIR to the document sharing environment. So that would be the one I would highlight.
Okay, thank you, John, very much. So you might want to be asking when you're going through the showcase if they're leveraging that profile based on FHIR. Also in the patient care coordination domain, another listing of them. Care planning is a big one, and querying for existing data in mobile devices. We have a radiology imaging domain, a couple of them there. We have the quality research and public health domain. And there's one there for vital records, death reporting. So I think that might be available in the showcase as well. So,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, and in many of those cases, there's actually might be HL7 implementation guides on similar topics that sort of overlap a little bit with the IHE profiles. In this particular case, what I did was list some of the topics, the Connectathon tracks, that we do in certain areas which overlap with some of these same IHE profiles. And so again, the idea is to bring both organizations support them. So there's a whole track at each Connectathon on a care plan using resources specifically identified for that purpose. There's activities going on around medical device and implantable tracking, which again, an area with IHE has particular expertise in. We actually had a track, these are from the last New Orleans Connectathon just in January, but we usually have a track on devices on FHIR too. We're actually needed to get some more help on that one within the HL7 community. We're having trouble getting enough participation from device vendors, which IHE again has a lot of connections with. Provider directory is one of the Argonaut projects. It was one of the tracks that were put in place, a standard directory FHIR-based service for looking up provider information, which has some overlap. And our patient track. A patient is kind of the core resource, the core content resource within HL7. That's usually the place where people start the first time they go to an HL7 FHIR Connectathon. And again, that overlaps directly with the work that John mentioned before. And there was devices on FHIR, which was one of those activities that started out from the HL7 FHIR Connectathon. Actually, was one of the tracks for the IHE Connected Plugathon.
Okay. Speaking of which, the IHE Plugathon. So this is a track within our Connectathon that we've started to do to be able to incorporate emerging technologies and emerging standards. And devices on FHIR was one of those tracks. We also focused on blockchain this year and the Internet of Medical Things and mHealth. So you can see there is data in many places. This really shows the continuum of that and being able to get at the data and show the way standards enable interoperability across the continuum of care. I would say the Plugathon from IHE is the closest thing that we have to the FHIR Connectathon, although it slightly differences, a few differences as well. So just to give you an example of how we're evolving in IHE, similarly to the way HL7 is evolving as well.
Yeah.
So now, yeah, go ahead.
Is that me or you?
That's you.
I rely on Joyce to tell me when I'm supposed to talk. So there's a new initiative a little background to that. When I joined HL7 a couple of years ago, and a little bit of head scratching that, given all the stuff we've said about, we should be working a whole lot more closely together. But there was just some, a little bit of friction there that things weren't as smooth as they could be. And I didn't really understand why, whatever it is, the point is that we're trying to achieve the same things. We both have incredible capabilities and skills and communities that we're bringing together. And so what can we do to actually get more benefit? And by working more closely together was the objective. So I proposed, in my naive way, is like, well, why don't we try to do a specific project where we'll try to bring the best pieces we can and see what we can do to actually, try to make more progress by combining efforts more rather than doing similar things in parallel, which we've been doing. And, the idea is always good. It was a little ambitious. I thought we'd be a little farther along than we are. But the idea is that let's try to combine our activities to make some significant progress. And we picked an area. The area we looked at was cancer staging, something that really requires lots of different information from lots of different sources. You have imaging data, you have genomics data, you have all kinds of device data, you have all kinds of observational patient data. And so, collectively, we can really cover a much broader swath than we can do individually to do that. And the idea is we all have these connectathons. But what we can do is sort of pick this project and try to incrementally move it along from connectathon to connectathon as we go from in January, we each have a connectathon in the US. In spring, we each have one in Europe. We have HIMSS in the middle of those things, which is where we are today. Yeah. Well, let's try to get something together and actually produce something. We came up with 2 breast cancer storyboards that as a starting point, and they haven't quite been translated into detailed use cases, but again, you can see the type of information, pathology information, treatment information, imaging information, and all kinds of EHR data that you need in order to be able to properly assess and describe the current stage of cancer, which is a really huge public health issue. And we wanted to get involvement from various HL7 work groups and the IHE patient care coordination domain in particular. Now, again, ideas always sound better than they are in practicality, and so things haven't moved quite as good. But the good thing is that people are on board and people are already experiencing the benefits, and we're moving along, not quite as far as I thought now, but we didn't really allow enough time. So I'm viewing this as sort of like getting things going with the hope that over the coming year that we'll continue to do these things more and more. Yeah. The next slide is an example of a FHIR profile that's using the Simplifier tool. It's actually the tool that also drives the FHIR registry. And it's sort of describing some of the content elements that are involved in cancer staging. And again, we've sort of started putting these pieces together, but we haven't quite gotten to the point where we're able to, again, the use case needs a lot more definition before we can actually get to the point of thinking about profile specification development. But this particular profile is a content profile of some of the core common data elements that are necessary to drive the use case. And the goals of trying to work together is, yes, to try to make progress, but also try to help each other out. So FHIR can, we actually think that FHIR can benefit from using the IHE Gazelle test platform and to help us get to the next stage, particularly as we're making the transition with the first resources becoming normative. We also, recognize IHE traditionally, like most standards organizations, publishing PDF-type specifications in the FHIR world. I mean, all specifications are computer-readable online and so we're working to try to help IHE to use. And that doesn't mean that they have to be HL7 specifications. I mean, the implementation publisher is something that's open and accessible that IHE can use internally and might help them in terms of producing first specifications. We want to get more HL7 work groups working with the appropriate IHE groups, associated IHE groups, and again, helping with conformance testing and validation services. But we also want IHE thinks can benefit particularly from a lot of the work that's been done in terminology services in the IHE world, which can be brought into the IHE profile world as well. The FHIR has done an amazing job in making terminologies accessible through RESTful APIs, and that fits very nicely with the types of things to really streamline some of the work, some of the profiles that already exist in the IHE world. So we're hoping to do all these things together so that some of the tooling that FHIR has is available to IHE, some of the tooling that IHE has is available to FHIR, and most importantly, everyone's trying to collaborate to be able to get more things done by working together and sharing.
So from an industry perspective, I work for HIMSS, but I also do work for IHE. And we have a mission that really wants to make the best use of information and technology for the better patient outcomes. And that's really a commitment to work together with other groups. HIMSS does a lot of collaboration. So I naturally bring that forward in my role at IHE to HL7, and it's great to see us sitting at the dais talking together about this. So we both want, and both organizations want to more rapidly advance interoperability by sharing our knowledge and expertise We have decades of standards development experience, but now we have innovation, a lot of disruption in the industry and new technologies. So we want to leverage that to advance innovation. Break down the silos and align our work and minimize duplication. Why reinvent the wheel? And I think what you mentioned about the publication and not being in PDF documents, that's huge. That's really an area where we need to learn from HL7. And finally, from the industry perspective, demonstrate the importance of standards. Much of the interoperability you're seeing in the showcase is standards-based, and that's what makes it happen. I don't think everybody understands that, and that's not easy work. So together we can build that bridge and improve quality and outcomes as a result. So in summary, Wayne, do you want to talk about some conclusions?
Yeah, this is all motherhood and apple pie, but you'll see a lot of booths out there claiming to be interoperable, but they often define it as sort of point-to-point communications. Okay, we talk to Cerner, or we talk to EHR, but if you think of interoperability in its true sense, the only way to actually achieve that is to really reach out to each and every person. I mean, the idea, the ultimate goal is that everyone who's an affected party needs to work together to achieve full interoperability. And since we're talking about healthcare data, which affects every living person on Earth, this is something that can only be achieved by, expanding collaboration and really, getting, people working together to actually make this happen. I mean, I think a lot of things have happened in the last few years that show that, that we can get there. But again, it's not something that any one organization can use, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be just doing everything we can, putting about our personal, objectives subservient to the greater good, which is what we're trying to achieve. And I think that HL7 IHE. I'm pretty excited. I'm very happy with the momentum and with just the dynamics we've had. That people are excited about it, and they're talking, and things are better. And having HIMSS support from HIMSS as well can really make a big difference in being able to share this common vision and make it actionable. And, as I said, we didn't, I was a little ambitious maybe when I first started this thing, but, we're only beginning to see what we can do. I mean, we just scratched the surface right now. And so I am looking forward to keeping this going, making progress on this particular project and maybe a few others. And so maybe by next year we'll have a whole lot more to say.
There you go. We'll be back up here. I think I can get us an invite to this stage. Like that. Okay. So stay tuned for more progress and updates as our collaboration continues. And thank you very much for joining us today. Yep. Now we'll open it up to questions, and we have a lot of time, so fire away. Don't leave, John Murky. If they ask any technical questions, I'm going to need you.
You explained the IHE well. But during the day, today, yesterday, the other day, everybody in the interoperability talks about HIE.
Oh, yeah.
And I tried to figure out what this word could mean. Is it a verb? Is it a noun? Is it a consultation? Is it a certification? I fail to know what it's really mean, HIE. Except I figured out whenever they talk about interoperability, they says HIE entity or HIE. Okay. So can you explain what is HIE?
Sure. So it's the same three letters mixed around, but HIE would be Health Information Exchange, and that can be both a noun and a verb. So the verb is literally what HL7 and IHE are doing by standards, enabling health information to be exchanged, shared, accessed. But HIE, the noun, is an entity that has rules for participating, and that entity typically has a technical framework based on standards, and a lot of times it is HL7 and IHE that enable that. But the entity has organizations, hospitals, providers that join it, and then they can share data because they've agreed to do that within their region or state or wherever the geographical area is. A hospital can join an HIE. Yes. Yeah, and make sure that HL7 and IHE are at the base of it. At the Discovery Center, there is more information about health information exchange, so you might want to stop in there later on today. Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
There's been a lot of complaint in the industry in the past that the vendors have been resistant to conforming to standards and promoting the exchange of information. Do you find that that has improved? Do you find that they've bought in to the concept of and the value of adhering to the standards a little bit better?
Well, if you're here for Steve Posnak's talk right before, the government has had a lot of influence in trying to, whatever the degree of real or perceived information blocking has occurred. I think that the availability, first of all, the 21st Century Cures mandate of making, of putting in place APIs that will make data accessible to patients without special effort, those key words, have made a big change. I mean, they've really had a huge influence. I think the availability of the fire specification has made a difference because there's a better way to do that in a way that that vendors can actually share and collaborate like they're doing through Project Argonaut than there was before, and it gives them less of an excuse to say they can't do it. I mean, so there's that as well. A lot of the things about sharing information is not so much standards related. It's the bigger problem, which are policies and organizational rules and attitudes. And those are the things that take time to change. But I certainly see it changing, improving, getting better. I'm interested in what Joyce has to say.
Yeah, I would agree. And just seeing this showcase grow, I mean, when it started in 2006, there were, maybe 20 vendors that participated, and today I don't even know how many are here, quite a few products, but as well as the government agencies, the VA, and I think the commitment is there, and I think being able to have a place like this to show what you're doing and kind of get credit for that in a sense with your customers is a way to create an incentive. So I think we are moving forward very rapidly. Good question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming together and presenting it. It was really helpful to understand what IHE profiles and fire profiles. I mean, that whole conversation was very helpful. I have another question on the direct messaging thing. Just want to make sure, how does it fit in to these organizations? Is it a separate entity?
Yes.
I know the whole integration there, kind of thing. If you can share any thoughts, how does that fit into the HIE world in the long-term basis, not just in a short-term meaningful use perspective, but a long-term, how does it fit in? I'd really appreciate your thoughts on that.
Wayne, can you take that one?
Well, I mean, direct is orthogonal to the things we're doing. It's a way of authorization of basically having a certificate. It's a way to securely identify the source and the receiver of a particular transaction. So the direct is used commonly to move data using the clinical document architecture in HL7, and there's an activity right now to adapt the direct standard, but the direct method to FHIR as well. So we think of it as it's sort of at a different level than the level of the standard and the technology that we've been talking about so much. And there are other methods of doing that as well, but it's kind of like identifying the message, the sender and the receiver, and making sure that the communication goes correctly between the two.
I guess, can you apply direct to many use cases that you can do with a traditional HIE, whether IHE or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on direct, but my understanding it's most widely used for secure email transactions of patient records between this individual to. John knows this stuff. We should ask him to comment on it. He'd be the best person to do that. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Ask John.
No, he's saying no. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for this very informative session, and I have been attached to IHE last 2-3 years, so I have got good idea about IHE Connectathon also, but I just got information about Fire Connectathon. So is it like the way IHE is also certifying the vendors that IHE certified profile for these things? So same thing happens with the fire connectathon. This is question 1. And because IHE profiles are more kind of, vendor to vendor, but when it comes to fire, then a lot of new apps, developer and all those things also are using fire things. So if some vendor gets certified as a fire connectathon, then are they bound to have that, available for any API developers? That is the second question.
Well, so let's see. Anyone can participate in a Fire Connect-a-thon. And to do that, you basically just sign up and you pick which track you're going to be on. So you need to come there with and the tracks are all published and defined in advance. They're kind of like scenarios. We're going to be testing these profiles. We're going to be exploring these use cases. We're going to be simulating this type of business environment. And it's a way for people to try out their stuff. So it's one way, for example, EHR vendors try out their API to see whether they can actually support those scenarios that are being explored. App developers come there to basically get access to the EHR APIs with test data and see whether their apps can work with multiple EHR sources, from Cerner and Epic and Allscripts and others, And so, but it's tied around the track descriptions. Now, people who are active in the fire community have influence in defining what those track descriptions will be. And certainly, given the way it is, things do drift and people try something new because they're in the same room and say, hey, this is exciting, let's see what we do. But there is you sort of have to plug into something within one of those tracks, or else you'll just be sort of sitting at a table by yourself, which really doesn't help the problem. So that's how it works now. Again, you have your specific profiles that you're testing,
Right.
and so it's much more controlled and rigorous. But then you brought in the plug-a-thons to do the sort of more exploratory side.
Right. When you first sign up for the IHE Connect-a-thon, you have to sign up for what you're going to test.
Yeah.
What profiles, and then that's how the matching goes.
Yeah, so you have to come in with some idea of something you want to do and fit into one of the tracks. We had 27 tracks at the last Connect-a-thon. So there's a lot of different things there, and they're all published on the Fire Wiki, and you can get that very easily at HL7.org and just click on the Firebox, and you can see that. The next one will be in Cologne, Germany in May. The IHE Connect-a-thon is in The Hague about 3 weeks earlier in the Netherlands. But all that stuff is available and accessible. And the next one in the U.S. will be in Baltimore. The next Fire Connect-a-thon will be in the U.S. in Baltimore in September.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? John Murky, you want to correct anything that I said wrong? Okay. Oh boy, thumbs up from John Murky. That's a big day. All right, well, we hope that you will participate in what we're doing and take it to deployment, and look forward to more collaboration between IHE and HL7. What do you think?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was a lot of fun.